Welcome, everybody, to Microsoft Unboxed POD episode 22. We have made it 22 episodes with you guys. I'm your host today, Kareem Anderson. I'm joined by.
David Allen, as we mentioned last week, I've got water this week, but we're 1 year past the drinking age. So I don't know if my buddy over there's got any drinks or not, but
I
just
have
what.
water because we're in working hours, but I will pretend. If you want, I can pretend to be drunk and have alcohol in here. If that makes people who are drinking currently with us feel like they're welcomed. Um, we, like I said, have a lot to talk about. There's been a busy week in the Microsoft world, um, despite not really announcing a whole lot of, I guess, what people would consider enticing headlines. Um, we have, and what we'll be talking about are games, at least right off the bat. Well, we're going to start you off with all the fun, consumer facing kind of things. We're going to be talking about where we at the Xbox 360. The Call of Duty Black Ops 6. What date that's coming out, and when you guys can get your hands on it. We'll be talking about more Xbox consoles coming this holiday season. We're also going to be talking about uh, Microsoft launching its uh, Copilot PCs next week without its signature feature and what that can mean for the feature and for Microsoft going forward. We'll be talking about how Apple, who had their WWDC event, we'll briefly talk about that. We need to really go into depth about it, but how they're already strong arming AI to bend it to its will and to make more money off of it somehow. We're also going to be talking about Microsoft having to meet with the House Committee on Homeland Security and perhaps why it has affected a few of its products already, i.e., Recall and Outlook, and what affects Microsoft's stance on security is going to have in the future. And then we're going to talk, kind of round up the pod with a anecdotal experience on with one of the first Copilot PCs out in the wild. Everyone's been talking about they ran benchmarks, they've touched the devices, but they never really played around with it. An individual got theirs a week early, and they were moderately disappointed in the performance. And what does that mean for the devices coming out? That should be getting in hands or we're getting reviews as soon as Tuesday. So we're gonna go through all that. With that being said, I'm gonna let my co-host start talking because I've been talking way too much. You want to give us our first topic?
I do. I'm not going to say my buddy here doesn't play games. I know he does, but gaming is really one of my things. So I'm going to hit us up here with some good gaming news that some folks have been ready to talk about. Call of Duty Black Ops 6. Everybody write this down. October 26th. We've also got it coming to Game Pass. So that will be the first round of Call of Duty in the Microsoft Game Pass. And supposedly, from what I read, it is for PC and Xbox Game Pass on that day. But here's the catch. For those of you that like the early betas, and there's going to be an early beta, this is where they get you. You've got to purchase the game to get to the early beta. I kind of understand that. They want to have some way to control the participation in the early beta. They, don't want every millions of people flocking in there, and it gives them an opportunity to make some straight up cash on some sales of the title because we know that the Xbox gamers, if you're Game Pass members, you're not going to be laying down that $70, at least not directly to Call of Duty this year. You're going to be paying your Game Pass subscription. Now, we know that we have 16 new maps with more maps coming and updates as always. We know that zombie mode is here. So, and we also know that this is set during for those that are old enough, the early to mid 90s during what the U.S. was in the Gulf War. So, for those of us that are mine and my buddy's age here, we've got something that maybe we recognize and play the game. So that'll be cool. But at least the wraps are off for the Call of Duty fans. This is the first release, what I might consider the big release of Game Pass. This is the Activision Blizzard merger that we've talked about for almost 2 years now at work. So, what do you guys think? What do you think?
I mean, this is great. I don't have much to say about this particular story because I am not an avid Call of Duty player. I have played in the past. It was interesting. Before Call of Duty went massive multi online, I played the story modes. I love Call of Duty. That was my game. When I realized that I was a horrible shot when it came to real life people or interacting with real life other gamers, I quickly dropped off the platform. But I'm happy for this. I just wanted to kind of fold in another tangential story about the Activision Blizzard Microsoft moving towards publishing more story, which is we saw headlines this week about Sea of Thieves doing particularly well on the PS5, at least topping the charts for almost 2 months. I think last month in April, it topped the charts for downloads and sales in Europe, and now we're seeing the same thing happen kind of in America in the month of May. I mean, for the month of May. So yeah, April and May, and it beat out other Sony games, or at least blockbusters that happen to be on the Sony platform that include Madden NFL 24, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, NBA 2K24, and even PlayStation's exclusive Helldivers 2 and Stellar Blade. So it's it's a game that people love. Upon hearing that news, I went and started playing it again, and I could see the appeal because it is, like I said, it's got a mix of first party, it's got a mix of RPG, it's got a huge mix of open world, and it's kind of a themed game. Like you don't Call of Duty, it's modern day warfare. It's in the title. It's guys with guns, and every now and then they'll throw in some futuristic tech or whatever. Madden is, it's a football sim. NBA 2K is a football. I mean, these are very grounded in reality games, but to be able to kind of create your own pirate, man your own ship, and deal with those kind of things in an everyday sense. Like I was just on a mission the other day to get a piece of treasure. Apparently, one of the pieces of treasure was cursed. I put it on my ship, went back in the water to get some other things. I came back and the treasure had exploded, which meant my ship caught on fire. I had to use a bucket to try and get all the fire out. And as I am very bad at gaming, my ship sunk, and then I was eaten by a shark. So you can see why there are many things that can make the game fun without having to be a full massive online experience. But there are those elements as well, as like you'll come across other people who have much faster ships, better ships, more guns, ammo, waiting to take all your things. So there are a lot of things to like about it, and I can see why Microsoft chose that one. I'm pretty sure they'll probably do the same thing with State of Decay, which is another first-party exclusive that they did well with, and we saw, because of the Game Fest or the showcase that they have. I think it's State of Decay 3 is supposed to be coming out soon, and I'm pretty sure that'll be on the platform. So I said all this to say that Microsoft's pivot towards becoming a publisher, putting things on its previous rivals, it seems to be working out for them, and I think the better marketed games, unlike Hi-Fi Rush and things like that, will do well on PlayStation's platform.
And while we're on the topic of, I want to mention something. This is just a mention. I'm not trying to take away from Call of Duty's Thunder, but while you were talking of other games, Ubisoft has come out with a game called X Defiant. For those that haven't played it, um, it's not getting a lot of marketing. It's not getting a lot of marketing money because it's a free Call of Duty. You know how Call of Duty has the Warzone that's free for everybody to play, and X Defiant is kind of a down and dirty, enter the game, walk into a level, the old capture the flag, the dominations, and you respawn. I had a chance to pick that up this week just for fun to see if it had any competition for Call of Duty whatsoever. So, any of our listeners or viewers out there are looking something different than Call of Duty, but still like the shoot 'em up style. check out Xdefy. Now, there's been a few patches come out in the last week that have really, there's a lot of YouTube content out there where people are saying, is this the Call of Duty killer? I have probably watched 30 or 40 different videos, and I would say the odds are 50-50 depending on what you like. But it's a pretty good game. Pick it up for anybody out there interested in just looking something, like you said, just something different.
Yeah, speaking of games, I think you have another headline in the gaming realm. What else are we talking
Yep,
about?
let's go ahead and pick this one up while we're here because guess what? To play these games, if you're going to stay in the console ecosystem, you've got a chance this holiday season to pick up some brand new consoles. Now, before you get too excited, Microsoft has not changed the internals necessarily. We do see that the Series X has a 2 terabyte internal storage for those that are like myself that have been going out and buying the expansion cards. We know that the Series S is still at the 1 terabyte maximum, but I think Microsoft is calling this, it's a white color. I'm trying to find, where did I write
Robot
down?
White.
Say that one more time.
Robot White.
Yep, it's robot white. So that is your change for the Series S. Instead of being the black that we got last year, the Series S is robot white, 1 terabyte. Now let's slide down to the Series X to make sure we get this correct. Now here's one more catch on the Series X. The Series X is a diskless model. So if you're used to playing your DVDs, your Blu-rays, this is not the model for you. It is also robot white, but here's the catch. There's the special edition Xbox Series X that is kind of, I'm going to call it sparkly here. And they say it represents, or celestial, that represents the number of gamers and the number of games being played on Xbox. Pretty cool. This one is the 2 terabyte model. This comes in limited edition. Now, I believe that was going to set you back a whopping $5.99. So sort of be prepared when you go to the cash register for that one. That one is $5.99. The regular Series S is still sitting at the $349 price point. I did see, for those looking something cheap, there are some refurbished models in the Microsoft Store as of yesterday of the regular Series S that is still just white standard 512 storage for $199. So if you're looking at entry point, that's an idea. Now, there's no release date on these yet. Pre-orders are available for these, and they're supposed to be here sometime around the holiday season. So,
Yeah.
what are people's thoughts on this? I think it's good that we up the storage on that top end model, but really all we did was maybe change the casing. What are people's thoughts on that?
Yeah, for those of you listening, the special edition comes in the Galaxy Black. For those of you who have been here from the beginning of the launch, that's that black tower looking one. But the special edition has sprinkles of green, essentially. So imagine if someone had took the regular Xbox Series X and then like took a paintbrush and sprinkled green across the casing itself. It's a really cool looking design. As far as thoughts on it, uh, more options are always better. It's interesting to see Microsoft kind of keep pushing towards this diskless array of devices because it's been, if you were to pull an analogy, it's the frog in the boiling pot kind of thing. Like we all got really alarmed during the Xbox One when they said that, hey, you're going to always have a device that needs to always be connected. And there was a whole, in a submarine debacle kind of scenario where everyone was like, no, I want disc. I want to be able to play the games when I want to play them. And Microsoft's made a poor choice in this. I'm going to jump over to PlayStation because they are doing the same thing, or at least not publicly talking about it. Fast forward 6-7 years, people realize that in order to play a lot of these games with your friends online, you have to be, surprise, surprise, online. That I know that you always preach, and I'm always there with you about people in rural areas that don't have the bandwidth, and there should always be options for that. I don't disagree with that. I think those ones should actually be cheaper options. To be honest with you, I think that that just makes more sense. I mean, I know the optical putting the optical drive in costs more, but I think in order to do that, maybe you pull out some of the more powerful GPUs and guts in order to balance it out. And I'm not saying that people in rural areas deserve a lesser experience. I just think if your idea is to keep pushing forward, I, then you need to switch that dynamic, saying like, hey, the diskless ones will have all of these features, and for those of you who still maintain or just don't or aren't fortunate enough to be in an area where you could be online all the time or play these specific games, here's this version. And when you are set, when you do have that ability, when you are able to make that transition, here's the diskless one. And I think those should be the same tandem. So to wrap it all up, I think it's great that they are offering a bunch of different options. I think the prices need to come down on these, to be honest with you. Like you said, the tech hasn't changed. Nothing's really improved except the storage. $599 for special edition, 4 years into this generation, 5 years almost,
Seems a little
is
high.
ridiculous. It is. I mean, come on, Microsoft. If you're gonna do a special edition, make it 450 at the most. What was that? Was that the price for the initial launch? I believe, because the regular console itself has come down almost 50, $60. So I think these prices should reflect that. But I am glad to see that they made a Series X with 1 TB diskless version, because again, not everybody is walking around with DVDs or optical or CDs that they need to utilize for. It's just wasted space for them.
Well, I will say one more thing. I think you're dead on, and I will throw this out there. Starlink, whether you like Elon Musk or not, Starlink is becoming a place that people in these rural areas. I saw Starlink in action last week and was able to sign into an Xbox. So, for those people that don't know the internet options out there and are not in tech, aka the parents of children, Starlink is an option. I know for some places it's $5.99 for your dish. Some places it's discounted a little less, depending on where you're located in the world. And service ranges from $120 to $150 a month. What I saw with it was 100, 150 meg downloads, sometimes higher, sometimes a little lower. But what was important with gaming was your ping time, and your ping times are usually between 20 and 50 for what time I got to play, which is more than suitable for playing Xbox games. So maybe Microsoft sees that, you know, we're seeing these 5G options out there from the T-Mobiles, the AT&Ts, the Verizons, and Starlink. So maybe that gap that I like to talk about is closing just a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think they've also initiated their own efforts to kind of bring broadband to specific areas. And I believe they're build by programs where they try and launch, set a data center in a rural area and then try and build a community around it, provide, high tech jobs that require, bandwidth and that require internet and things like that in order to prosper. So, they're slowly but surely trying to close that gap. Moving on to the next topic, though, talking about closing gaps. Apple had its WWDC conference this week, and they tried to close the gap. Stay with me here. Stay with me here. For those of you listening, he's lowered his head into his hands already. They talked a lot about AI, and so did the community covering them. We talked about it because we are persnickety somewhat about Apple products and things like that. So we threw in our jabs, but I'm not going to go over everything they covered because they covered a lot. They went over every operating system they had, and each one of them got some updates except for Apple Vision, because I don't consider what they offered updates. They just talked about, hey, we got some cameras, you can start filming whatever that 4-dimensional video platform that they use. I forget what it's called, but you can start making more videos for that. And I'm like, all right, well, they've settled on the Vision Pro being an entertainment thing, sit back and consume kind of product versus pitching the idea of working in medicine or manufacturing or things like that. They talked about the Apple Watch. It's got a bunch of new fitness features. Uh, kind of delaying, telling your watch like, "Hey, I don't want to stand up. Stop telling me to stand up. I'm taking a break. I'm gonna not, be doing my workout for this week," so that the watch doesn't bother you going forward. Those kind of things. Nothing as far as measuring, new sensors or anything like that, because this wasn't a hardware thing. They talked about the major thing basically was that they have Apple Intelligence. And I want to get your thoughts on this real quick. I'm not going to break it down what it is, but apparently Apple, just like Microsoft, is creating its own large language models and small language models to kind of run on device, and that was what Apple really wanted to do. They rarely mentioned uh, AI, but they did use a lot of machine learning, generative tasks, things like that. So they've used all the encompassing aspects of what we consider AI, and they've localized it to the devices, specifically iPhones, perhaps on iPads as well. And they're going to be using Apple Intelligence to basically juice up Siri. That is going to be how you interact with a majority of its AI features, AI-like features. This isn't like Copilot, where it's a separate entity outside of Cortana or any other assistant. Siri will be your conduit to a lot of Apple Intelligence, and it's going to be doing a lot. But I want to get your thoughts on Apple catching up, so to speak, and then we'll get into how ChatGPT plays into this in a second.
Well, I'm not gonna slam them bad here. I see their approach, and the Apple approach has always been consumer oriented. Family friendly is the term I like to think about with Apple, because when they give you their demos, they're always talking about how you can schedule with your kids, how you can create, how you can manage things in school. And I think what Apple has done here, as I mentioned a little bit on last week's podcast, when AI started, the consumer idea was out there. We're going to push this to consumers. Now we've seen it, as you've called it, a pivot to where, okay, maybe Copilot is more of a business thing, and maybe it's for those such as ourselves here that understand what AI is and can make use of it. It's not trickled down in a mass way to the consumer yet. Well, where are most of the consumer cell phones? Love Apple or hate them, they're leading the charge with the number of cell phones out there. They've got the Home Pods, the AirPods, the Anything Pods, the you get it. But I think this is the good way to bring it to consumers. They're baking it into their apps for now. You know how they get it baked in and all we're getting ready to talk about. But I think this is the right way to see if consumers are interested. I know we talked a little bit off camera this week. How interested are consumers, and how interested are app developers in making AI available to consumers? And what makes a consumer, a person ordering DoorDash, a person looking an Uber, use AI versus picking up that app? These are still things that have got to be figured out, and the customer still has to be convinced that AI is the way to do it, and not the traditional way that we've been doing it for the last, let's say, 15 years. Well, not quite 15. We're on the iPhone, what, year 16? So, well, 18 coming this year. So, you know, we've got to figure out what the consumer wants, first of all. And I think Apple's trying to do that. And I think they've kind of thrown the lure in the lake and said, okay, consumers, bite on what you want, and we will curtail what we offer to that, because they did say that the language model would be opening with more features later. So I think this is the feedback deployment, if you will. They're watching, they're taking analytics, they're looking at what people actually use and going from there.
Yeah, for those of you kind of probably scratching your head, if you're out there and you're not following as closely or not terminally online like myself and my co-host. The way that Apple is going to deploy this is different than the way Microsoft is doing it, and particularly the way Google is kind of doing it as well. What they're doing is they're calling Apple Intelligence basically a conglomerate of machine learning, predictive tasks, and some other language models as its own thing. Whereas Microsoft has basically rebranded its partnership with OpenAI, which provides ChatGPT, and they basically use ChatGPT as the underlying infrastructure for all of its Copilot initiatives and efforts, essentially. Dolly, I believe, for like the our artistry and things like that. So Microsoft, and now it's creating and deploying its own small language models for other specific things that'll be used for Windows 11 going forward, and those MPUs that we talked about for the new Surface devices, stuff like that. But it's basically Microsoft covering over ChatGPT and claiming it as its own. Apple's not doing that per se. What Apple's doing is they're using, their own version of their language models to power things like I said, Siri is going to be able to kind of help extract content and data from apps that, first-party Apple apps, to help provide you with more information, context, and task-oriented operations. Like say, hey, I booked a flight for, going to, Houston, Texas next week. Look me up or build me out an itinerary. And what it's going to do is going to surface through emails to find out friends that, you might have organized this trip with, areas that you've been known to visit when you've been in Houston, via Apple Maps or whatnot, messages that you've coordinated this trip with, and pull all that together to kind of give you like, hey, you were talking to Sandy about going to Houston as well. She's been with you there before. You guys stopped at this barbecue place. We'll put that on there, and it'll build you out this kind of thing. And again, this is the kind of vision that Microsoft had for Copilot. But again, this is Apple's own version. Where it starts to differentiate and where it gets to the headline that we're talking about is that they will also use ChatGPT in tandem for tasks that its own LLMs can't manage, bigger, more broader things that require, its extensive training models from OpenAI. Now, the reason why Apple wants to do it their own way is because their biggest sell is that these things will be done on device. And we know that ChatGPT uses the internet. It uses the cloud. It is kind of open and accessible, not as secure as what Apple would like to achieve. So Apple Intelligence will do everything on device, use only the information that's on the device, encrypt that stuff, and not push it out to the cloud. But if there are tasks or questions that you need to ask it that it needs to defer to ChatGPT, it will give you a prompt saying like, hey, ChatGPT will be, you'll be using this, and you're giving it authorization to send whatever that prompt is to the cloud to get information forward. And even when it goes to that cloud, it's our cloud, our somehow secure cloud from Apple. And the prompt that goes to the cloud will then be deleted, destroyed after it's presented a result. So those prompts are being saved. Your data is not going to be saved. There's no way that they can kind of pin an IP to you. OpenAI is just basically providing additional context and information that Apple Intelligence can't do just yet. Now, this is very much like the Google Maps situation where eventually Apple will just cannibalize what OpenAI is doing and say, hey, we've got enough data information from our people. We don't need you, OpenAI, anymore. And this is what gets to our headline. There was big talk about OpenAI being partners with Apple. And last week we talked about how Microsoft might feel about this being a majority share investor in there. What are the technicalities of a deal, so to speak, of this? And what we're finding out from, I believe, Mark Gurman over at Bloomberg is that Apple is not even paying to have OpenAI or ChatGPT's services paired with theirs. They're leveraging exposure. They're saying, hey, OpenAI, we have, I believe 2.2 billion iOS devices. I believe probably, I forget the number of North American ones that they'll be access to because this feature, this Apple Intelligence is only North America, only in English. But that should be enough payment for you guys. You don't need to pay to use your service. You guys should just be happy that you're being exposed to our customers, and hopefully you can turn those customers into, I believe, ChatGPT Plus subscribers. Now, how do you feel about this, knowing that ChatGPT uses, as far as we know, Azure's cloud services, which means that whenever someone chooses to use a ChatGPT response for the prompt, they will be tapping Microsoft's Azure cloud service in order to do that. But Microsoft's not seeing a dollar from this because ChatGPT is not getting any money from Apple.
I want, I'm going to be a little blunt here. I want an understanding. And I don't know that we're going to get that understanding. And if a viewer out there that is in the business world or even works with AI at a deeper level in the business field, if you understand the logic behind this, I'd love an email, anything, because Apple and Microsoft have always been rivals, and they've only worked together for the sake of bringing Microsoft Office and business products to the Apple platform. And Microsoft has invested billions of dollars into OpenAI. OpenAI is hosted on Azure servers, which are Microsoft servers. And Apple is getting ready to release millions and millions and millions of queries on those Azure servers, and Microsoft is getting nothing from it, thus footing the bill, and I'm sure having to add Azure capacity to be prepared for this release when people start using it. So Microsoft is likely already spending money for Apple. I do not see the logic behind this whatsoever.
Yeah,
I don't
you
get
and I
it.
talked about this. I can see that again. Microsoft is an investor; they're not an owner, so they can't dictate the terms. So this deal was
True.
Altman and Tim Cook sat down and did this, and Microsoft just had to sit back and watch. Now, I'm sure they could suggest certain things, so I'm sure they had some kind of say in the matter, or not a say, but an opinion on the proposed business deal. And as the structure for OpenAI's partnership with Microsoft, they need to pay off a lot of this investment. So again, I think if I had to be crude about this, and again, I don't know how a lot of AI partnerships and resources are allocated, but I can imagine that they're saying, again, if we can get people to get ChatGPT Plus, and again, these were people we didn't have access to begin with to get that. Now, again, ChatGPT is already an app on the device, but for more people who are just going to have it for free and be able to go to it, assuming that Apple Intelligence isn't as great as it is, because if it is, this is a very bad deal. There's a few million to be made in revenue from people saying, all right, I'll pay the extra, I don't know, what is it, $20 or whatever to get ChatGPT Plus and just defer to that over Apple Intelligence. Or just the idea that, hey, I think they're hoping maybe the marketing works and Apple uses ChatGPT versus anybody understanding what Apple Intelligence actually is doing. They're saying, hey, Apple uses ChatGPT. So when I get on a Mac, I'll use ChatGPT. When I, go to my next device, I'll need ChatGPT because it has all my, but again, it doesn't really get all your information, but that's the idea, is that we'll get subscriptions from this. What I'm posing to you, we know this is a short-term thing. This isn't like search where it's like, hey, they're paying $1 billion to make sure that they stay on this device and they lock down the market on this. Apple's already said two things that are very troubling if I were OpenAI. One, they want a revenue share. So they already want to make money off of AI immediately. For people who provide AI services or platforms, who invested in cloud services or data centers, they want to already start making money off of you immediately. They're craving about that in that regard. And, I give them that, power to them for being shrewd businessmen. They've entered the market late and they've already devised a way to make money off of other people's hard work. The other thing is that we know that they're in talks with Google to present Gemini, and they've also talked about pairing other AI services. And I'm assuming, whenever it's applicable to whatever the AI prompt or task is, they will, give you a list or give their users a list of AI providers they can choose from in order to complete that task. So if you are creating images, maybe they give you, here's Dolly and here's Firefly. Which one would you like to create your task with? If you are using a business version, here's Copilot, or I forget what IBM's AI is using, or Salesforce. Which one would you like to use to complete that? If it's a digital assistant for home automation. Maybe you have more Google devices than you do actual Apple devices. Would you like to use Apple Intelligence or Gemini or Google Assistant or whatever they call it going forward? That is what their strategy is. And then again, they're going to extract revenue from those prompts from those people. So OpenAI is in a very limited window right now to be the only AI provider on the platform, but it's going to go away. So you've invested in this deal, which we know is probably, once Google shows up, probably going to edge you completely out before everyone else floods the market on Apple. Why do this again? Or why not try and get money from Apple in the process? Because they need you.
I was going to say, you're going to need that money. You are absolutely going to need that money, because you bring up, my friend, what I have been thinking about all week since we, kind of unraveled what was going on here with Apple and AI. It's kind of like when we were in school. Once one person, put on the new, snazzy T-shirt, the next week 5 people had it, the next week 10 people had it, and what do you know? Everybody, every store and every person's wearing the T-shirt, popular, and that's exactly what's going on here. Apple is mooching off of Microsoft and OpenAI until they get their models. Maybe that's why Google said no, because remember, Apple went to Google first and said, "Hey, we want on the Gemini train." For whatever reason, that deal didn't work out. Maybe Google wanted money and Apple wasn't willing to give it. We don't know why that deal didn't work out. But everybody's going to have their own language model, Apple included, and it's just like choosing what smartphone you want, what cell phone provider you want. If it's the cell phone provider, they're all going to let you do the same thing. They're going to let you have some data, make some calls, send some text. What language model do you want to use? The exclusivity of this will be gone. Which one do you prefer? Which one fits your task? Just like which cell phone company fits your budget, what you need for your family. And it goes back to something that I mentioned weeks ago. What subscription model for AI do you want, if any?
Well,
Because it's got to be paid for.
Yeah, and to your point, Apple's got a explicit history of Sherlocking everything. So again, you are training
iCloud
its
Plus
models.
with AI is coming.
Exactly. You are helping train their models so that they, again, people are using the Apple Mail client because it's on the device. It's convenient. Doesn't mean that it's the preferred one. And when they get on their MacBook, they may use Gmail. But on their phone, they may use the mail client. Same thing for the calendar. Same thing for contacts, things like that, because it's on the device. And that's what's going to happen with Apple Intelligence. And all OpenAI is doing is help train that and speed up that process. Because at some point, people are just going to say, I'm going to use the thing that's already on there. I don't need a subscription to another app that I need to use. Oh, in addition, and we'll talk about the existential crisis that is Apple's about to bring upon everybody by extracting content without directing people to apps. But eventually, people are just gonna say, I don't want to have to go to ChatGPT's app or its website to, re-up my subscription or whatever. I'm just going to use Apple Intelligence because I don't have to do anything. I put my Apple ID in and it's there. I don't need to, manage anything else. I don't need to go to my credit card and be like, oh, hey, Copilot Pro is charging me $20 a month. ChatGPT Plus is charging me $20. I'm going to cancel both of those because I have a good enough. It's not the best, but a good enough thing on my phone that's free. If I were, again, I don't want to keep harping on it, but if I were ChatGPT, knowing that Apple needed to say something more than just Apple Intelligence, and you were, they scrambled and couldn't get anything done with Google, you could have had them sort of over a barrel and saying like, hey, we need to get something more from you guys. And that the fact that we're on your devices isn't enough because we're already on your device. We have a ChatGPT app already on the device. We need some sort of, you scratch my back, I scratch your back, you scratch my back a little bit more than I'm doing you because I'm doing you the favor, so to speak. because investors would have said, hey, Apple Intelligence is great now, it's unproven. But the fact that they partnered with ChatGPT shot their stocks way up, because that's the new thing that everyone needs to have in the portfolio going forward as a business. Uh, if you have one last thing, we'll mention that, and then we'll move on our last few topics.
Well, I feel like this is going to fix itself, and somebody is going to be left out, because ultimately subscribers, and I've got to be bluntly honest here, consumers are lazy. I'm going to call it what it is. We've got so much going on. Consumers are lazy. We're caught. My term is we're caught in the scroll. We're scrolling on our phones for the next thing. We got the TikToks, the Facebooks, the Twitters, and on and on and on. So when it comes time to make that subscription purchase, I know Kareem has done it. We have kind of joked about it. I have done it. We tend to purchase the bundle deal. We tend to put it on that automatic payment because that's easy. That's one less thing we have to worry about. We don't have to have the husband or the wife or the child, mom, dad, such and such service don't work. Dang it, I forgot to pay that. That's the one subscription I got to pay. Well, now let me pull my phone out, my laptop, and find the credit card and pay that subscription. So just as soon as Apple gets their language model where they're comfortable, now watch what I'm about to say here, when they're comfortable with it working in their products, they didn't say it was going to interface with Microsoft Word on Apple. Their products. That's what you got to be careful for. They're not going to give the Copilot to the world any help. So once they're comfortable with it in their products, they're going to say, okay, Apple Cloud Plus or Apple Cloud Intelligence is now part of your iCloud subscription for an extra $10, $20, $30, whatever it is they're looking for. Guess what? They've sold it right there. OpenAI can begin packing their bags with the Apple relationship. They got nothing in return.
Yeah,
I don't
at least
get
they're
it.
going to try to scrape the data, but they're not even going to get access to that. With that being said, we're going to move on to another topic, which is Microsoft Copilot PCs launching without recall. I wrote about this, but I think you want to talk about it. Go right ahead.
Microsoft, why? Just when I thought last week I give you lots of praise for being on the right track, Windows, ARM, efficiency, power, recall, NPUs, I give it all to you last week. I was ready for the Surface devices to hit this week. Now you take all my fun away because you were storing recall data from someone that had seen it, a coder that had seen it that we mentioned last week, in plain text format on devices, which got this person's attention. They gave you a chance to fix it or said they were going to publish how they figured this out. You came out earlier this week and said, hey, we're going to fix it. We understand. We made a snafu. We did it again. So now you get to the end of the week here and you've thought about it a little bit more. Maybe got a little pressure from a few government agencies and some security folks that, okay, we're just going to not do this next week for everybody. This is the signature feature that our signature devices were looking for. Guess what? You're not getting it. And what got me was we don't know when or if we are getting it. That's the catch. Does it come? Does it not come? Does it come baked into another product? Does it come in another form? Does it come at all? So let me ask one question and I'll turn it over to you for a minute. Apple came out with the M series chip. There was no AI when these chips came out. AI was not with us yet. They marketed these chips as powerful, efficient, battery friendly. Those chips have done Apple very well. So now Microsoft has their turn. They had the software component. They're making these devices Copilot certified. Now, what are we buying, and why should our friends and our listeners go stand in line at the Best Buy next week or go to MicrosoftStore.com and pick up these devices? Because the signature feature that Microsoft wants to build on is not there.
Yeah, I'm of two minds in this. Now, I will, as a fan and as someone excited about tech, I was, thoroughly let down by this. I texted you
Yes.
late last night. I think you were getting ready to go to bed, and I was railing at the, yelling at the stars like this is a bad idea. Microsoft's pulling a Windows timeline all over again. They're gonna, you know, shelve this thing. They're gonna test it first, and then say, hey, it's not worth it. And then I was of another mind this morning that they're gonna shelve this thing, test it, and say it's not worth it, and probably be right about it for the wrong reasons, necessarily. As you mentioned, Microsoft's selling these new devices as kind of the start of the evolution of the Windows PC, so to speak. A big start. They marketed the hell out of it. But the idea is that going forward with these ARM processors, that they're going to be able to start making thinner, lighter devices. Now, an Ultrabook is pretty thin as is, and I know a lot of people that are like begging for thinner, but it's what Apple markets their devices with: thinner, lighter, but above all, longer battery. This is something since I've been computing has always been an issue with Windows. It used to be an issue with Apple for a while. They just happened to have the full stack, so their performance was a little bit better. So whereas a Windows PC would get you 3.5 hours, an Apple device would get you 12. And that was always the gap. That's what you expected. Microsoft saying going forward, that's not going to be the case anymore. Whereas an M2 device might get you, 18 hours, a Windows PC will get you 16 and a half in some instances, maybe even 20, depending on the device and the manufacturer. Those are numbers and those are margins that Microsoft's never been within grasp of. So the idea of having to lug around your charger as a Windows user, being locked to a wall or a coffee shop that needs to be next to a plug, will hopefully be a non-existent thing going forward. That is one of the biggest sells. The other sell is performance in general. We're always hearing about fan noise and apps crashing, or the way that Windows kind of manages memory and things like that has always been kind of always a tier down from the way that Apple has done it. And with these new chips, that should not be the case. Now we'll have to wait to see next week how the translation layer actually works, and if these apps are going to be performant on it. But they're already getting a lot of buy-in from people who are making ARM dedicated versions of their apps. So the performance should be through the roof because they're now moving this x86 app to an ARM app, which means you'll get all the benefits of that. No more fan noise, no more hot laps or whatever, or hot bags, so to speak. That's the idea. So without recall, these devices should still be good. And we're seeing again from early reviews that the battery life's great, the performance is pretty good, the gaming on it is better than decent. That's already a win. That's something that Intel keeps saying, and every time we get a device, we always come short of it. So if, again, these deliver on those promises, that's great. We don't need recall. Recall is a liability for Microsoft, especially in this precarious situation that it's in right now, where it's having government ask, hey, you guys told us you could secure things with our email and your productivity apps, and we're finding out, Dan, relatively routinely that China's hacked you, Russia's hacked you. Like, you're getting hacked because people are finding ways to get into your secure operating systems or platforms. Now imagine you launch recall and that gets hacked. It's something that people didn't ask for. It's a great feature. Again, it's oftentimes people get things that they didn't ask for that they really appreciate. And then there are times people didn't ask for something, you present it and it breaks, and they're like, we didn't want this, and you made it worse. Microsoft done that plenty of times in Windows. So I think the idea that recall is being pulled and perhaps shelved, who knows, indefinitely, it sucks because of the potential it had. But it's also something a lot of people don't know about, and people already have a negative thing towards. So unless you can launch it perfectly and not validate any of those negative criticisms, which again looks like they're about to walk right into, it's better to take your time or not present it at all. So that's kind of where I stand on this whole thing.
And I agree with both of your statements completely. And Microsoft has a history of being guilty. And another very popular podcaster, Mr. Paul Thurrott, made a comment this weekend. I'm going to, if Paul happens to catch this, I'm going to paraphrase him. He says that Microsoft lives in a bubble. And I kind of agree with what he said. Paul and I don't always agree. We agree most of the time, but we don't always agree that Apple pays attention to security, and that's something we can discuss. Are the same people pointing fingers at Microsoft going to point fingers at Apple for their implementations and making sure that their implementation is secure? You know, that's a question that we have to ask ourselves now. What happens when Microsoft is forced to be in that bubble and get out of that bubble and say, look, we have to comply, or customers don't want the service we're offering? That's concerning to me.
Well, this is also an interesting thing too, and I'm sure other people will talk about this, ad nauseum. But Microsoft was in a transitional phase with whatever this product is being handed off from Panos to I forget the name of the guy who is running the whole Windows division over there. So there may have been some drop off in communications between the two as that transition's happened. And another thing that happened was that Microsoft tried to launch this security prone AI feature without having tested it in the real world. To your point as a bubble, what they normally do and what they're doing now, because recall isn't being, it isn't like we're not going to have access to it. For people who are going to go out and buy some of these new devices, you can enroll in the insider program and get access to it. You can opt into it and start testing it out, especially with all of the new security protocols that Microsoft has put in place to kind of make it more secure than when they had first started testing it with people, or people getting access to it. So if you're on a current PC, you're not going to have access to recall. You weren't going to have it to begin with. But if you go out and buy some of these new, Surface Pro, Surface Laptop, the new Lenovo's or the Dells or the HPs or the Samsung devices with these NPUs, you can enroll in the Insider program and get immediate access to it. This is what Microsoft, I know they couldn't have done it because they need the NPUs, but this is something that they, sort of the way Apple did is you announce it and then you run betas and let people try it out for a while before you roll it out. They were trying to be secretive and be like, hey, we have this cool feature that no one's seen or no one's tested, no one's even thought about. And I don't think any of their engineers or people were talking about like, hey, what happens if someone finds this folder way very deep that has the plain text? How do we secure that? They weren't having those conversations. Now they're forced to have those conversations and they're rethinking it. Like, hey, you know what? Maybe we put this out in the world. We let people test it. Give us all the bad scenarios, the niche areas in which we didn't, we couldn't have thought of because, we work with this constantly and we don't, we aren't encountering all these anecdotal experiences. And they give us all that feedback and then we build it into this new feature and release it hopefully, at the end of the year or maybe next year. Who knows if it takes a while for it to come out. But the idea that if you launched it this summer and a handful of people were like, you know what, someone got access to my credit card and now I'm broke. That's a story that you don't need. That's a headline that you don't want. And that's a comparison, again, if Apple rolls this out and they roll it out perfectly, that you don't need right now. So, maybe people won't, bother with asking, how Apple Intelligence does the exact same thing as Microsoft. And no one's questioned it because they trust, Apple and, they have a much smaller audience base when it comes to the desktop features of things. I think they're at like 14% of the PC market or whatever. And who knows how people are going to interact with Siri after 13 years of it being a joke. Maybe they won't ever use it. Uh, but the idea that saying, hey, Microsoft launched Recall and it was laughed out of the building and it was a security issue and it was just another blunder. I know that everyone's seeing this, kind of retrenchment and saying like, hey, we're going to take a step back. That's kind of, oh, Microsoft losing the ball again. But it's the smart thing to do right now. Let some of that heat kind of boil over. Let people say, hey, the devices are great as is. And then you update with Recall later and people can go like, oh, even better. I got something additional. Didn't have to pay for it. It just was added to my device. It added, productivity, or it helped me out. And it worked like as marketed and as done, versus I bought this new PC and it basically stole, helped people get identity theft and ruin my life. So I'm upset that we're not going to be getting it initially. I wanted to play around with it, but I will just be enrolling as an insider to do so if I get a new device.
And, as you were talking there, I was thinking, you mentioned a few times testing it. What's the Windows Insider program supposed to be? There's millions and millions of people inside the Windows, all pun intended here, Windows Insider program. In fact, so many people that in times past, within the last year or so, Microsoft has talked about adjusting how the Insider program works. So Microsoft has been working on these new PCs that we're aware of for a year. Now, I'm sure they've been working on these PCs much longer than a year. And let's see, these devices are supposed to hit the market on the 18th. Today is the 14th. We found out this headline, let's give them every minute we can. We found out this headline on the 13th, yesterday, last night when we were talking about it, that we're not getting the feature. So Microsoft, I don't know what to say here, except I want to be proper and say I'm very upset with the fact that you've got all these insiders testing these things. Did you not see the issue before 6/13 of 2024 when your launch is on 6/18? Or did you just think, I've got to put on my Throt hat here for just a minute. Did you just think people weren't going to care and you were going to get away with it again?
I think it's both. Why does it have to be either or? I think it was literally both. They didn't think about it, and for the person who was like, they were like, "Shut up, don't worry about it."
Exactly.
You don't have to put any more thought into it.
Were you going to wait for people's, as you mentioned, people's identities to just get destroyed and nobody know why, and suddenly somebody figures it out and goes, "Oh, Microsoft, you're at fault." Now, I think I would rather acknowledge the problem and fix the problem than be on the tail end of those lawsuits if, and this is a big if something like that was to happen and they found out that Microsoft was at fault and knew about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to wrap this up by saying, for those of you who were excited about this feature, you can still get it. It just won't be on your device in the open box form. You will have to do you'll have to jump through a few insider hoops. Fortunately, Microsoft made the process very simple. You go to your Windows settings, say, hey, I'd like to opt into I think it's Canary, probably, option for insiders, restart your device, and then that feature should show up. Now, again, they're going to release it to insiders soon. So I think it's at the end of next month, which is July. You'll probably be able to enroll and try it out. But at the end of the day, get the new devices if all of the things that we've reviewed so far pan out, because these are supposed to be, again, the start of a new Windows era where, we aren't tied to the power charger, and and we're getting more features for Windows that are allocated to different sections of the processor. So sorry that Recall isn't the, out of the box feature. You'll still have access to it. Just get the new devices if they suit your new needs, your new requirements. Moving on to the last thing, or our last section, which is basically kind of pulled from this recall thing. Microsoft had to answer. I believe they were meeting with. Make sure I get the name of the committee right. It is the U.S. House Committee on Homeland Security. They met with them yesterday. They had some prepared remarks that we wrote about and reported on the day before, because they issue those to Congress, so they both have an idea of common grounds. They're basically answering for a CSRB report. The CSRB stands for Cyber Safety Review Board. They issued a report in April saying, Microsoft, you done effed up. You had Exchange, and there was a big hack by, I believe, a Chinese-based hacker community. I don't know if it was state sanctioned, but they were called Storm-0558. And this is a big hack that made headlines last year, I believe it was. And the intrusion basically got the ire of the U.S. body of Congress. And unless you're basically trying to buy another company, they normally don't drag companies in for these kind of things unless it's egregious. And to this point, Microsoft's been egregiously negligent when it comes to security. Now, we know that Satya Nadella issued a memo back in April, and again, time is coincidental, saying, hey, we're going to pivot to being a security-first company. We need to have security at the forefront of our decision-making when it comes to offering services and platforms. Is it secure is always going to be the question we ask before we release it to anybody. And I said all that to say this ties into recall. Again, as you're answering questions at the U.S. Committee of Homeland Security, you can't then release recall 5 days later and it be another blunder, because you've already told them, again, during their sit down with them, they had already acknowledged that, hey, we were at fault. And I believe the CSRB report offered 25 recommendations that the company could take to, basically shore up this kind of a threat to security. Microsoft says that they're addressing at least 16 of them. They're going to implement 16 of those 25 recommendations, and that they're also adding an additional 22 of their own. So not all 25 applied to them. This is a committee that's based on, reflecting on security, and it's general. So again, not all 25 were there, but they took 16 of them directly, saying like, hey, you guys are right on about these 16. And we're going to add 22 of our own to kind of, regain your trust. And they're at a kind of a pivotal section because, the rivals see blood in the water. They're saying like, hey, Microsoft is a threat. And I believe this is coming from a letter issued by the, what are they called? I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. It's like the Net Choice, I believe. And that, that is a consortium that includes Google, Amazon, some other companies that are also rivals and love to kind of come in and take those government contracts from Microsoft. They issued their statement saying, let me make sure I get the right quote. Microsoft poses an especially acute national security risk given it has a dominant 85% market share in the U.S. government productivity software market, which makes the government dependent on Microsoft's products, including Outlook, email, Word, Excel, Teams, instant messaging, and Azure cloud platforms. And they're basically saying, when one of those things gets hacked or breached, it ties into all this other stuff. So maybe you either start divesting in having a full stack of Microsoft products and start using some of ours, and maybe we can win over your government contracts. And that's where Microsoft sits right now. So the government's already saying you've been notified and your competitors are talking to us. What are you going to do? And so now they've kind of pulled back on some things, and they've also I don't want to get you in on this. What are your thoughts on this before I talk about what else they've done to kind of
Microsoft is in a your blood in the water statement, I think, was 100% accurate. And I think Microsoft is in a precarious position here because, to me, and there are people out there that can take this back further. It goes back to the continued Exchange hacks that got the government attention. Then Activision got the government attention. You make statements, and it's just like Kareem and I, we can't go to the government and say, well, we thought we made $50,000 last year, but we really made 250,000. Can you just forgive us and we won't have to pay those taxes on that and all those fees that you're going to put on there? You can't be playing with regulatory bodies. Let's call, I know in different countries they're called different things. You can't be playing with regulatory bodies like this, and you can't promise these regulatory bodies one thing and then 6 months later, a year later, completely do exactly what you said you weren't going to do. Microsoft, I love you. You make computing what it should be as far as the products that you produce. Why is securing these such a problem? You're going to keep, throwing the shark food in the water, and your competitors are going to bite you. You're going to lose these contracts, these lucrative contracts with these businesses, schools, military, the things that make you billions of dollars and pay those Microsoft bills. I don't get why we can't get it right. Apple's watching, IBM, Lenovo, they're watching. You know, all of these companies that you deal with, they're watching what's going on and going, we can fix this. We can go get this contract. We can make sure that we, make this company feel better about doing business with us than doing business with Microsoft. You know, we can use Google Cloud, for example. We can use Oracle. We can use Amazon if we need to. Come on, folks, get it together.
Yeah, and to your point, when the product is the thing at question that makes people move away from you, it is very hard. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's
Yes,
very hard to regain that. It's different to be like, hey, you know what? Google Cloud is just too expensive. Because you can always lower the price. If you can figure out a way to subsidize that, you can lower the price. People will be like, the product itself was great. I just couldn't afford it. Lower the price, people come flooding it. Or if it's accessibility, I couldn't use it on this platform. You could figure out a way to technologically get accessibility there. And people would be like, I'm back. I'll start using it again. But when it's this thing is broken, or I had a very bad experience with it, i.e., people who are on Windows saying like, "Hey, I'm tired of updates. I'm tired of restarts. I'm tired of the blue screen of death." Those people are Mac people, and they'll be the Mac people. Depending on when they switched in a generation, they will be that, and they will teach their kids that. It's going to take maybe their kids to be like, "Hey, I've never had those experiences. Let me try Windows. Let me move over because I've never had that bad taste on it." If you lose those government contracts, those governments are going to say, "These are the bad experiences we had with it. We're not coming back." And it will take generations and generations to be like, okay, maybe we can reevaluate that. And that time, your company may or may not be solvent. I'm going to move on to the next headline because it also again plays into this. Microsoft is killing several Outlook.com features, again, to improve security. This was an announcement they made this week. And this is in line with what they're telling the government. Like, we're going to start taking security seriously. So we're pulling back. We pull back on recall. We're going to be pulling back on features for Outlook.com that include support for basic authentication and deprecated. Basic authentication is deprecated, and that'll end in September. So it's in keeping with similar deprecations elsewhere, which is happening in Microsoft 365 Commercial, Azure, and etc. Microsoft is deprecating support for basic authentication, the use of username and passwords only in Outlook.com, because it's insecure, is what they're saying. Starting today, those basic authentications will experience multiple authentication prompts. And starting September 16th next year, all Outlook.com users will need to use modern authentication methods on the web and in apps, meaning maybe Microsoft Authenticator app or some other form of two-factor authentication via your phone or maybe another email address. There can be any support for mail and calendar in Windows 10 and 11. So, we've seen them tease out the Outlook.com web app. They're going to be cutting ties to both the dedicated apps because there are, ways to get into those apps and cause havoc. So they don't want to have any ties to that. They're going to make the light version of Outlook.com web app will also be deprecated and no longer be supported as of August 19th next year. Microsoft currently offers a lightweight version of the Outlook.com web app to work in browsers, but it's retiring that in August. And going forward, Cortana is deprecated in other related services. I'm not sure how people can hack that, but who knows? Maybe they'll figure out a way. But they're ending that, and they're also ending Gmail support in Outlook.com, which currently allows users to access to Gmail, email as well. But that support is being retired June 30th, 2024. Users on Windows should use Outlook for Windows, which will enable them to use their Gmail accounts seamlessly. So you'll be able to kind of bake that in. But I think when I say Gmail support, it's basically being able to kind of tie notifications and other things into the protocols. I believe it's IMAP or whatever they call that thing. So they're going to be ending that. So again, these are features that I'm sure IT admins are going to bemoan because it made their jobs easier just to be able to quickly tie in certain things. But for the sake of security, Microsoft ending all of that.
I've got basically one thing to say here because I look to my left and there's a Chromebook sitting over there, and it dawned on me. I'm not going to give Google a free pass on security with some of the things you just mentioned with email clients, with software, with consumer-facing software. I'm sure Google has its problems as well. I'm sure any company has some level of security issues or something they're facing. That's part of the world we live in today. But when I was listening to what you were saying, what does Google do that nobody else does? 99% of their stuff is web-based. 100% web-based. Google very rarely produces everyday consumer apps that are stored, housed, and ran on your machine. And to secure that, they say, okay, very simple. As you mentioned, we're going to do some sort of two-factor authentication. And here it kind of plays back to the Microsoft recall thing. Clearly, they're doing it on device. That's how the hack was discovered, the security breach. So I want to ask, as we close up here, I want to ask our readers a question. There's arguments for cloud security. There's arguments for local security. We've always kind of mentioned that cloud security is more prevalent because we trust Microsoft, Google, Amazon to keep things secure, to keep that back end secure. Whereas what's stored on device, we kind of depend on the user to have input. So which would you as a consumer prefer? I'm okay with my good old 2FA apps over here on my phone getting me logged into the services that I need to. Is it aggravating sometimes? Absolutely it is. But my stuff, as far as I know, is safe.
I think that's, again, to the recall feature, that was supposed to be Microsoft's foray into on-device computing. Apple's been doing it, solidly for the iPhones for 5 years or 6 years now. And Microsoft was hoping to use recall as its feature showcase to say, hey, we can do secure on-device grandiose experiences. And again, I'm not saying that it's never going to happen. I have my doubts, but if they can get recall to show up, this is another way that they can say, hey, a lot of the cloud stuff that we were trying to do, we've shrunk it down to these small language models, and we're doing them on device. You don't, and on that device, that is where it's stored. If it's somehow hacked, it's because someone got a hold of your device. We've put the onus on you to secure your device. It's no longer on us to secure these things. And when it needs to go to the cloud, we'll figure out a way to secure that, which I think Apple's, so far saying that they can do. Maybe they will be the litmus test on how to do that. And maybe other people can follow that. Because then Microsoft can say, hey, now that we've secured everything on your device and you're about to move to a new device, we have a two-factor encrypted authentication way to move that info up into the cloud and back down to the next device so that you can keep all that, you can keep your profile of things going forward. I think that's the goal. I don't want to belabor the point anymore, but to your point, I can see people being okay with either, as long as neither are hacked. That is the idea. Again, if you're going to say, I'm going to put all your stuff in the cloud, like Apple's saying, and I'm secured, if it's not hacked, I don't care. If it's going to be all on my device, and say someone breaks into my house and steals my laptop and they can't get to it, I don't care either way, as long as no one can get to it. And I think that's where Microsoft needs to win everyone's trust back. That's where they had this hearing. This is why they're pulling back features, and I'm assuming we're going to see more and more of this as time goes on. They're going to start just being able to say, these were some great ideas, but they were also security prone or insecure at that. So let's pull them back. Maybe people don't need them. Maybe they don't need this much, this many options. We start to own that. Last thing I want to talk about is, and it's a quick one, is we got someone who got the Samsung Galaxy Book Edge 14 early. Again, these devices are supposed to come out on Tuesday. He got his last week, and he was not impressed by the performance. He went on to Reddit. I believe the Redditor that we're looking for, his name is, I had the name here. Capconia, Caponica 23, went on and wrote a lovely piece. This person, I would suggest you go and like his stuff. Don't be negative. He wrote a very succinct recap of his experience. And basically what he boils down to is that the performance was under par. And a couple people ran with the headline. It was salacious. But the idea is, he explains it later, and I believe other people in Reddit, which makes Reddit a great community, explain why he was seeing that. It was partly because his CPU was capped. These devices, these ARM devices coming from Snapdragon, are supposed to have performance at about, I think it's 3.5 to 3.8 gigahertz for these CPUs. When he ran his device, it was hovering around 2.5 or 2.8, I believe. And he was seeing, subpar scores, and was like, hey, I hope this isn't indicative of, these new Copilot Plus PCs coming out. He went on to test some other things. He tested some gaming and said that he was getting 40 to 60 frames per second, but he was getting severe drops. That's another negative. As far as the positives are concerned, he said that the battery life was exceptional compared to his other Samsung device. So this isn't even like manufacturer to manufacturer, like, oh, here's a Dell, here's a Samsung. He had the Samsung Galaxy Book 360, which is the one they believe came out last year. And he has the Edge now, and he says that the Edge, the 360 would last him to about, I think he said 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. He's saying the Edge lasts him to about 11 o'clock, doing same sort of workload, which is great. This is what we were talking about as far as battery is concerned. He also updated his post, I believe today or yesterday, saying that he got a GPU update, which then bumped his game frames per second from capping at 60 to starting at 60 and going to 100 with no frame drop. So that's good. What are your thoughts on his performance so far? I know you and I talked off mic about it.
Well, it's definitely disappointing. And if this was to be the final numbers as he got his device early, there would be a problem. But as we discussed, I'm fully expecting the Windows update servers, the firmware servers, and everybody's updating processes to be wide open here in just a few days. When we start powering these devices on, I'm sure Microsoft has a list of updates ready for us. I'm sure the firmware makers have lots of things ready for us, because I don't think anybody really wants these devices to fail. And I think this is the first time that we're seeing, sure, as you mentioned, there's OEMs, there's Samsung, Dell, Microsoft, that Asus and whoever else I'm leaving out that's making these devices. But I feel like as a whole for computing, we want these devices to succeed. I'm not feeling like this is a Dell device versus a Microsoft device versus a Samsung device. I'm not feeling that, because if you look at the devices, they all pretty much have the same feature set. Maybe this one has an extra port that this one doesn't have, or the color's a little different, or the casing is a little different. But the internals are the same feature set. So there's only so many ways to differentiate. But I think as a whole, we want these to succeed. And I encourage people getting these devices next week. I know you're going to want to see if your favorite app opens. Guilty as charged. I know you're going to want to see how quick your apps load. Guilty as charged. But let those updates run. Then make your judgment. As when we review units, I'll give you a little tip. When I get a review unit in, I've got one coming in today. When I get a review unit in, it comes out of the box. I do the sign-in process that you have to do with every PC, and Windows Updates runs until it is complete. And I know that there's not another cycle of updates coming. Then I start my analysis. So I encourage you as consumers that have put your pre-orders in, let those updates finish. Then make your analysis as to what your device is capable of.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I'm just going to end with that. He also mentioned that, uh, again, this is a 14-inch OLED display with 120 hertz refresh rate that's still getting amazing battery life. That his fans didn't come on.
That's interesting.
So that's the plus. Again, for all the negatives that we might have said in the story, the positives were again that some of the two largest complaints for Windows users are fan noise, heat, and battery. Aside from the operating system itself, kind of needing to have a learning curve. So if you can get past the Windows learning curve for a lot of people, these new devices seem to be offering a lot of what the MacBooks are. And again, we're waiting for software developers to release some of these supported ARM experiences. So to David's point, buy the devices, try and run them as normal as you normally do, but also know that there's a 6-month runway essentially for app developers to finish making these experiences. So again, maybe you don't run out and buy them. Maybe you wait. Maybe you get more information. But the idea is that at some point in the near future, these devices will take off, kind of like the M1s did. Right out the gate, people were skeptical. The performance was great on them, but they also didn't have a lot of app developer support. Their transition layer worked very well. Now they're getting direct app developer support, which makes the platform even better. Microsoft is hoping to get the exact same thing. But that being said, let's wrap this up. Where can people find you if they want to complain that their new devices are underperforming?
Complain, talk to me about how bad Apple is. Tell me that the security brigade needs to go check the Microsoft headquarters. I'm out here. I'm ready to listen. David PAJ 1978. That is on Threads and also on Twitter /X/ whatever name it is next week. Jump right in there. Be glad to talk to you guys.
Yeah, you can find me at Mindhead1 on Twitter. You can find me at Kareem Anderson on Threads and Instagram. Again, if you want to talk about Microsoft strategy, how if you trust them or not, whether they can be the secure company that they at least espouse to be. We hope you guys have a great weekend. Want to thank you for joining us for another longer podcast of information, and we hope that you guys can go out and impress your friends and family with this new information that you just gathered. Take care. Be safe. For those of you in stormy weathers, again,
Yes.
be extra safe and hopefully prepared.
We will see you next week, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good weekend.
Bye.